Victoria, and we're going to be talking about the future of work and the future of leadership. And does leadership need to change in the current, maybe we're all going to be working for robots. I don't know. Victoria's going to tell us. Before we dive in, Victoria, where can people find you?
They can find me. I have a website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. And from there, people can choose to link out on the other social platforms as well.
Fantastic. So, Victoria, just give us a brief outline of how you got to where you are today.
I began working at a very, very early age. So I had a lot of work experience. By the time I tell you this next part, I became the chief operating officer of a large outsourcing company at age 24. So I spent years in banking before that, banking operations. And then ever since, I've remained in the world of B2B professional services, consult all the way through operate with technology as the enabler, and at that executive level now for far too many years than I would like to say out loud. And I've been very, very focused on leadership and culture in large part because I actually made some mistakes early in my career. And actually for almost the last year, I've been actually running human capital businesses. So I actually get to work with and deliver services for other clients as it relates to their workforce and culture.
So, where do we start? Because leadership changed, didn't it, when we went into lockdown?
Very much so. I think I don't love the social headlines that were grabbed of the great resignation and quiet quitting. They're very apt at grabbing headlines, but really the reality was the employees realized they wanted something very differently. The ability to compartmentalize work and home went away as we worked, out of our homes during that time. And also the thinking around that, not only the what we do and connectedness to purpose and why we're here, but who we're doing it for and the kind of environments we want to be in. That's where it started to change. And we saw the pendulum swing.
Yeah, I'm my partner and I, we're probably the only people in London without a dog. And everybody seemed to go and buy a dog during lockdown. And of course, if you've got a dog, you can leave it in the house, but people want to work because they've got a dog. And I see stuff on LinkedIn where people go, "Oh, well, people don't, leadership has changed," but it hasn't changed. But it has, because actually what we're doing is we talk a lot to people like this. So in effect, we're leading from behind screens, aren't we?
Oh, very much so. And for some people that worked really well, Tim, more of the introverts, or quite frankly, there are jobs that are done where people just sit, at their desk all the time. And even at one point, I remember I relocated back to the US not long before COVID, and I found myself sitting on Zoom calls, sitting in the office. I'm like, why am I doing this? And so for people who are like me, I am a very relationship driven person. I'm much more of an extrovert. So I prefer the hybrid environment of being able to do the quiet stuff at home and take back-to-back Zoom calls from home, but being able to connect and be with people in person. And and things like innovation and creativity, a lot of that does actually, the spark happens when you are in person. So I think a balance is really when we look at what the future of work looks like going forward, there needs to be recognition for hybrid solutions.
So do you think the skills in leadership are changing?
That they are. I think they should have changed a long time ago, Tim. I spent a lot of time with executives talking, however, about as they're developing programs and plans for their leadership teams, that this doesn't mean it's a trade-off for solid business performance the way in which their shareholders expect. Sales and revenue and profitability actually improve when we change the way in which we lead. And so I wish businesses and organizations had been doing it long before there became an outcry and a demand from employees to do so.
And is it about having the business strategy?
Well, I think it needs to be embedded in business strategy. So and changing the incentive models, I think that's a downfall of many, many companies. They incent their leaders only on certain metrics, and we know that people will perform in ways in which they are compensated to do so. So we need to start adding additional metrics and looking at alternate facets of performance in the organization. And so that needs to be embedded in strategy. Everything from, yes, we want to see X growth percentage and improvement in profitability. We want to see net new client logos coming in.
Mm.
And we want to see a workforce that is much more diverse. We want to see higher employee satisfaction results. We want to see greater retention rates of our employees and promotions and advancement within our employees. That should be embedded in strategy.
Mm. And you talked earlier on about working in human resources. That requires a real proactive move, doesn't it, from a human resources stance?
Yeah, what I will say is I believe the role of HR, it needs to be the strategic business partner
Mm.
to the leaders of the business,
Yeah.
those that own the P&L. I think where many companies get it wrong is they think the satisfaction of employees and measuring employee satisfaction through the engagement surveys, that's the accountability of HR. Mm-mm. They're the team that develop the survey and implement it and report back and maybe come forward with improvement plans that the leaders need to execute. The reality is metrics such as diversity across the workforce itself and employee satisfaction and engagement and retention rates are owned by the business and by the leaders with support from strategic HR business partners.
And do you think that the skills that we require in leadership are are needing to change?
Oh, yeah. I think it's not only skills, I think there's, a courageousness, I will say, that
Okay.
needs to come. And so there are definite skills in learning um, how to manage performance, for sure, having the difficult conversations. I embrace the phrase radical candor coined by Kim Scott in her book. I've always operated that way, but now I have the vernacular. But having those kind of conversations is something. It can be a learned skill for those who are not comfortable. So that's
Mm.
definitely a skill. To finding the right mix of skill, potential, and fit in developing and creating teams. That's new, and we need to learn. And some of that just comes with experience. But the courageousness piece, I think, I refer to it as whole human leadership. And in that, it means that we need to show up in a very different way for our teams and and leading through the front. And that comes through building trust with our teams, rapport with our teams. And a lot of that is developed through the sharing of our own individual lived experiences, our vulnerabilities, and creating safe space for employees to feel like they can show up their whole selves at work.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the things that traditional leaders have always found very difficult, isn't it? Because in a way, before the COVID, there was work life and there was home life, and then they merged, and you could see into people's houses.
Yeah.
And then what we're asking for are for people to actually say, "I'm struggling with this," or "I don't know the answer."
Right. Right. And I mean, a lot of what I've come to as a leader, actually, I'll share with you actually as a result of my own learnings. So in becoming an executive at age 24, brand new mother, the only woman, a member of the LGBT community, um, I felt I needed to show up in a very particular way.
Mm.
And this is the way that many leaders, and I'll own it as a woman, so for all those reasons, I was the youngest by a couple decades, again, the only woman in the room, etc. I showed up in leadership. I've always been good at the radical candor. As I said, I'm strong at managing performance. I had I did not have the courage to show up and be myself. I wore a mask, and I found out my nickname probably in my mid to late 20s was the Iron Maiden. Like, oh, that's really unfortunate. But I didn't initially change, and it wasn't until some conversation a few months later where something else hit me in my face, and I said, "You know what? Like, I think my team were successful because they fear me, they wouldn't follow me." And
Yeah.
so my lessons in leadership have come from the fact that I failed And I was afraid to show that I was vulnerable. I had a pretty traumatic, youth and lived experience that informed the way I showed up every day. And I don't like the phrase imposter syndrome, but I questioned and so I wasn't going to give anyone any reasons to question why I had my seat at the table and that I was strong and I belonged there. And so I needed to develop the courage to do what I'm now coaching others to do as well.
So the elephant in the room is artificial intelligence, isn't it?
Oh,
That we've gone from zero to artificial intelligence invading just about everything in 12 months. I mean, how is it going to inform leadership?
well, so I think a significant way in which leaders will need to change with the adoption of AI within our businesses is in the change management and going back to the identification of skills. So I think business strategy now, when we look at developing our 3 and our 5-year plans, new products, new services, there's going to be significant change in how we develop those products and services. And so we need to be looking at our workforce and identifying what are the functional or technical skills that are going to be required today and building towards the future and doing an analysis of who do we have? Can we develop that? Do we need to buy that? Again, what's getting automated from that? And then what gets left behind? And a big part of being successful as a leader in that, beyond figuring out the skills and the workforce required to deliver, is the change management. Everyone's worried about what that means. The ability to have open and transparent conversations around the evolution and the fact that change will come. And you said one thing importantly, Tim, also acknowledging, I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part for leaders as well, is to say,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I can guarantee you it's going to change. Here's the path we're going to work on together. Here's what I can commit to in terms of, notifying you and timelines and the development we're going to make in you, et cetera. But at the same time, not promising that, it's not going to change and it's not going to have impact on them personally.
So you talked about human-centric leadership. Where does that have a place in an AI world?
The work that gets left behind requires much more human skill than ever before. What gets left behind is the exception management, the stuff that requires significantly greater innovation and complex problem solving. And if I think about it in the world of customer experience and operations, for example, what will get left behind is the conversation that needs to happen with those customers and the skills to be effective at communicating and problem solving and communicating with those customers. So it'll be instead of the focus that comes on, again, the really technical or functional work, will include this element of adding in the human skills that are going to be required to effectively do the job that gets left behind as AI takes over parts of it.
And being as we're talking about the future of work, what are those skills that that if we're gonna implement human-centric leadership, what are the skills that we need to have to provide human-centric leadership to our employees?
A significant part, I refer to it sort of as kind of the 3 acts of engagement. And one I've talked about, which is courage. The other is vulnerability. And the third is authenticity. That's going to be exceptionally important. And you say skills, and I reference it as skills. I mean, those are traits and behaviors, and hopefully, and they can become learned. Some of them are not natural or comfortable for people, but that coupled with other ones around, again, how to communicate more effectively, and of course, performance management. There's a whole group of skills that are required around how to lead teams, and depending on the different types of work and teams that you're leading. But I'll put those to the side. I think those others that can lean into a little bit more of the behavioral side are pretty important.
Yeah, one of the things that the journey that I've been on over the last 12 months was to find my purpose. I knew kind of what I wanted, but and it did take me 12 months. But I'm now in a situation where I kind of feel that I need to communicate that. And as a leader, I kind of feel that I need to communicate that to the people that in effect work for me. Is that, if if as a leader, should we be doing that? Is that something that we should be saying? This is who I am. This is, because in a way, it's kind of what my objective is. In the, in the old days, it's like kind of what your objectives are, but it's kind of bigger thinking than that, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. You go back to Simon Sinek's Start With Why, that viral talk. And he said, people don't buy what you do, they do why you do it.
Mm.
And so that a lot of that has to do with purpose. And I agree with you, Tim. I think it's critically important for leaders, not only to communicate the organizational purpose, their purpose, but help the employees figure out their own individual purpose and how that connects to all of what they do every day.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with a couple of people who work for me who said, I need to get my purpose, and we've kind of been trying to work on that. And for anybody out there, if there's a book on finding your purpose, we're kind of looking for one at the moment. So that and also understanding, therefore, what your values are.
Absolutely. I think that's critically important. And I think it's going to evolve and change over time for individuals. I sort of connected when I spent a lot of time talking to people around their brand, but really around articulating much more broadly, and values is a pretty big part of that. And again, I think of what I valued and how I viewed success in my 20s very different now that I'm in my late 40s. I said I wasn't going to give away my age, but there we go. But I do think that's really important. And but again, I also want to encourage people to recognize that they can pivot and it will evolve and change over time. Again, for me, my definition of success much earlier on was around owning greater and greater scope of responsibility, title and hierarchy and compensation. No longer, that's not my purpose. And that's not what I value anymore. And so figure out what it is now. And also a little bit, I always like to think about legacy and impact. I still have a long life ahead of me, but what is that? And bridge that back to the work that I do every day. And yes, you need to earn a paycheck, but again, does it bring you joy to be doing it? And how do you shift and change if it doesn't?
Yeah, one of my legacies, one is to do with one of my purposes is to do with legacy. You get to a certain age where you realize that you're not going to be around here that much longer, and you would actually like to be more than just at some dust.
Agree. A big part of it for me, when I sort of reevaluated my values and purpose, is around not only creating workplaces, but communities, and ideally the world at large, and leaving them better than when I came into it, around things like social justice and the advocacy I do for underrepresented groups within workplace community and beyond.
And so my partner has a 28-year-old and a 32-year-old, and they're only interested in working for organizations that are changing the world because of the environment, or because of art, or whatever it is. They're only interested in impact type organizations, as we would call them today.
Yeah. And I do think you're going to see a significant part of the younger generation very much in that place. And that's another thing we need to be incredibly mindful about when we think about how we attract and retain our employees.
Yeah, and I'm only mentioning it from a leadership perspective, that we need to understand the people that are either individual contributors or leaders that are reporting to us. We need to understand what their purpose is, and their purpose is quite often maybe just to turn up at 9 and go home at 5:30, because they actually have something far bigger to do outside of work.
Yeah, I had that from a personal standpoint. My older son said to me a number of years ago, he's like, "Mom, I'm really proud of he's in computer engineering." And I think I was working for IBM at the time. And as I was looking at him getting an internship, he's like, "Mom, I'm really proud of you." He says, "But you know that I don't want to be you. I don't want the life that you lead." He said, "I'm fine with mediocrity." He said, "I just want to get married and have kids, a dog, and a house, and be able to, spend all my time with them." And so his choice is very different. And for many like that.
So in the last 40 seconds, is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of the future of leadership and future of work?
I would encourage leaders to be incredibly bold. And as I said, the 3 acts of engagement around courageousness, vulnerability, and authenticity, and how critically important they are for the way in which we move forward.
Victoria, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about the future of work. It's a fascinating subject. I've had a number of people that have been, we've talked about this, and it changes all the time.
It does.
It is amazing how that I had someone during COVID and they were kind of, this is what it's going to be like after COVID. And it was actually far different than, because they weren't projecting far enough. And I think that, we're seeing this change coming in with AI, and we don't, again, it's just a bit like COVID. We thought that we know what it was going to be like, but it's going to be it's going to change so much, just as much as the web did.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. And thanks for having me on, Tim.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So where can people find you?
So my website, victoria-pelletier.com, or LinkedIn, as I know many of your listeners are business leaders or business persons. You can find me there.
And I've been to your website, and it's if you want to find anything about Victoria, the website's the place to go.
Thank you.
Victoria, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.